Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, How to Accelerate PHP Application Lifecycles Without Sacrificing Quality. First, at the bottom of your audience console, you'll find a number of widgets for questions, slides, and additional resources. When you have questions for the presenter during the webinar, click on the Q&A widget and submit your question. We will answer as many questions as possible at the end of the webinar, and if we run out of time, we'll get back to you via email. Second, a copy of today's slide deck will be available in the resources folder at the bottom of your screen. Third and finally, if you need any tech support during the webinar, please use the help option. With that, I'll introduce our presenters for today's webinar. Maurice Kherlakian, Director of Product Management for Zend, and Nico Krüger, Director of Global Sales Engineering here at Perforce. Maurice, Nico, thanks for joining us on today's webinar.
Thank you, Megan.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you for everybody for joining us today. One of the things we'd like to go over today is a couple of items within our agenda. The first is slow time to market. So how can we help you speed up the time to get your products out into the hands of your customers and really delight them with whatever product or service it is that you are trying to sell? Now, of course, a lot of this is very important when we get it into their hands. How do we help them understand and use our products to ensure that the quality of our products are good? So we really want to cover how you can use both the Perfecto product as well as the Zend technologies to help improve the quality of your products. And then thirdly, how can we help reduce some of those costs? We know that the longer things take to get fixed or out to your customers, that could delay revenue. It also is very expensive to fix things the longer they take. So let's take a look at how we can reduce some of those costs. And then fourth, how can we help look at those manual workflows you have today that really slow down the deployment and development cycles? How can we automate those? And what things do we offer today within the Perfecto and the Zend product suite that can help you do that? And then finally, how can we look at consolidating all the different tools you might be using today for testing and both front and back end to consolidate those to really get a single pane of glass view and how we can improve the efficiency between the different stakeholders within your teams. So Maurice, maybe if you want to run us through what really the ideal DevOps pipeline is and what it should look like from your view.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nico. Yeah, so as Nico was referring to, I mean, you look at development, from a few years ago, 10, 15 years ago to today, it's amazing how it changed. I entered this market, I don't know, in early 2000s, and it's amazing to see the tools and the amount of automation that we've seen in the past few years, and it's really a great time to be a developer, to be quite honest. And, I said one keyword in all this, automation. I mean, everything seems to be around automation today. And this webinar, what we're going to present to you today, is no exception to this. And we believe that automation, both in testing and deployment and in everything, in a lot of what you do as a developer today is key to be able to achieve the goals that Nico outlined in the agenda. So this slide right here shows you what the ideal DevOps pipeline looks like, right? I mean, for those of you who have implemented some sort of continuous integration, continuous delivery pipeline, you should be familiar with that flow. I mean, it's the common denominator. I would say it's the lowest kind of flow that you can implement across a fully automated development and deployment testing pipeline. And those of you who haven't and use tools like push code directly through whatever FTP, SFTP, secure FTP shell, if that still is a thing, you definitely want to look at some tools for automation, and we've got you covered there as well. So the ideal pipeline is something like this, looks something like this. So you start with an idea, then you plan, you code, you build, you test, and ultimately you run, you get user feedback, and then at every step, you've got some automated tools that are validating that what you wrote is actually not breaking previous functionality, or there are tests that were designed around the specific scenarios and the specific functionality of that specific feature to know and to make sure that that feature does what it's supposed to do. And then you go back to your original you go back and you start this over again. That's the software development lifecycle, right? So this is generally what a good pipeline looks like, what you aim to do. Now, in most cases, unfortunately, That's not the case. And you end up with a pipeline looking like this one, where you try to implement, the best that you can. You try to do these practices, and it just, things tend to break.
Absolutely, Maurice. I think what's important here is, really the far right-hand side. You almost want to start with the end in mind. And so it's all about the user's experience. And today it's really all about the digital experience. And that could be, how you're delivering your products. Could be via a browser, a phone, even could be as an API. And we know that, for a lot of teams that use PHP and use something like Zend as a server, that want to deploy things out and really delight their customers, it's all about how do I do that? And really the way and the method you do that is by giving the customers, the new functionality, staying ahead of the market, introducing the new products and services that you wanted to, or functionality within your web or mobile application. And so one of the things that can really slow you down, as you can see over here, is the fact that a lot of defects slip through to production. And this really causes a bad user experience. More so to that point is when these things slip to production, they take a lot of your time and effort to get resolved and fixed. And we know the longer that a bug, or the closer it gets to production, the longer it actually takes to fix it, because you've got to go reproduce it. The developer's got to get into that code again. We also know that it takes a lot more money to fix them at that end. So really our goal needs to be how do we get as few defects or bugs slipping through to production, so that we can reduce this bottleneck and ultimately actually reduce the cost of fixing these things. If we shift our testing closer to the engineering side of things, so when you, first of all, as a developer, you're trying to create the code and test it on different browsers or phones or APIs and whatnot, it's much easier to get to a problem and solve it when you're doing that, when you're creating the code. And of course, to help improve that even further, what happens when you do your code integration, your pull or your merge request, right? So I create my build, and now things start to kick off. How can I automatically cover my top 10 platforms that my customers are using that I know that, 80 to 90% of my users will be delighted, right? Because we will test on all their platforms to make sure it all works as they expect. And that is fundamental to what we see today, Maurice, where, you have some digital winners and some digital losers. Those that are winning today really understand that continuous quality, this continuous testing, is at the heart of delighting your customers, right? And it's absolutely critical, to that point that people start to recognize and see how they can improve that. But ultimately, if we can reduce those bottlenecks, stop the bugs going to production, not only does it save cost, but it really does, move up the user experience. So, Maurice, run us through a bit of what the goals would be, for this pipeline.
Absolutely, thanks, Nico. And yeah, I think part of this also, when you were speaking about this, Nico, is I'm thinking we're so fortunate to actually be able to see this in our customers' lives. I've certainly seen this. In our day-to-day engagements with our customers, where we really see the impact of catching those bugs earlier and catching, the whole left shift kind of effect. So shifting into the earlier in the development process, catching a bug as early as you can. And you really see what kind of difference it makes just by the sheer reduction of bugs and therefore time that they spend trying to fix those bugs. I mean, a lot of our customers that are more advanced actually track those metrics really closely. So we get a pretty good idea of the impact of those products. And I think, we're going to show you Zend and Perfecto today. And I think it's really a match made in heaven, because you can do a lot of you have the diagnostic side on the Zend side, on XenServer side, but you've got the running of the test and all these automation and this infrastructure that's really complicated to set up on the Perfecto side. Don't you think, Nico? I mean, it's really cool to see those two things working together.
Absolutely. And I think to that point, Maurice, maybe run us through exactly what Zend does, what it's all about, and I can certainly share with how Perfecto works and how the two can actually complement each other.
Absolutely. Let me just, I may not have addressed the slide on this previous, so I'm going to go back to this slide because I went on this thought of customers. I'm sorry, I messed up. Nico and I were kind of controlling the slides and I messed up. But let me talk about, what we're going to show you in terms of the delivery pipeline. So, by reducing the time that you spend on bug fixes and on, trying to catch those bugs earlier, you're automatically driving down the time, you're automatically driving down cost, but therefore you're spending more time on the code that actually matters. So really business logic and features in your application, therefore you're increasing innovation. And as a result, your quality of output is increasing because it's tested, and there's this feedback loop that I've been talking about, and that we're going to see more and more in this demo. We're going to talk about the feedback loop, so always closing the loop, getting from every step of the way when you test and getting those tests, getting the results of those tests and catching things as early as possible. So with that being said, so let me talk about the Zend side and what we're going to show you today. So what is XenServer? XenServer is an application platform, is an application server for PHP applications. So you can run any PHP application on XenServer. If it runs in PHP, it will run on XenServer. It's really built, the product itself is built around the Zend engine, which is the PHP runtime, the execution engine for PHP. And it's, as you know, PHP is extensible. You can write extensions for PHP. And that's what we did for XenServer. So we kept the core of PHP intact, but we augmented it, or we supplemented it with all these extensions that do all kinds of cool stuff. Focused obviously on security, on deployment, on monitoring and performance, on cache, and on debugging. And we're going to show you some of these features and functionalities as we go deeper into this demo. XenServer runs on a lot of different platforms, and that's one of the important things that we set out to do when we built XenServer. We wanted it to run the same way, whether you're running on Windows, whether you're running on Linux, whether you're running on IBM i. So think a few years back, this was really important because a lot of developers used to develop on Windows but push their code to production on Linux, which today is kind of is much less common. I mean, we tend to see virtual machines or Docker containers or things that simulate as much as possible the production environment, which is great. But with that being said, it's nonetheless an advantage of having XenServer being able to run on all these different platforms and really expecting the same kind of running or the same way that it runs across these different disparate platforms. Now, the top end shows you that any application, like I said, written in PHP can run on XenServer. As a matter of fact, on our demo today, we're going to show you Magento. But whether it's Magento, Drupal, WordPress, Joomla, CodeIgniter, or if your application is written on frameworks such as Laminas, Laravel, Symfony, or Yi, or if it's a plain old PHP application, it will run on XenServer without any problem. And it will give you the same level of diagnostics, and actually there's some specialized tools for all the applications. Depending on which application you're running, you can get more insight, which we'll see as well. Nico, back to you for Perfecto.
Thank you, Maurice. So Perfecto at its heart is really a continuous testing platform, right? And so Perfecto allows both the developers, the QA engineers, and even those that are on the business testing side to have a platform where they can test as their customers would be using the application. And that is really important. You know, what are my customers expecting when they use my, software, be it a web-based app, a mobile app or progressive web app as we're seeing today, or even if I'm delivering my product via an API, how do I get something to really, reproduce exactly what my customer would see? So first of all, Perfecto really started as a mobile cloud. So it has, over 10,000 mobile devices, Android, iOS, you name them, in this cloud, which you can get access to. Of course, that means not only can you test the native app, so iOS, Android app, but you can test the web app running on these different devices and different operating systems for the different iOS and Android devices. That includes tablets and so on. And then we also support cross-browser testing. So imagine you need to make sure that your application is served correctly on Safari, Edge, Chrome, Internet Explorer, different versions of Internet Explorer. How can you quickly and efficiently do that? And Perfecto allows you to do that. We also added mobile simulators and emulators. So you can, of course, run, those sort of simulators for specific purposes within our infrastructure as well. So Perfecto allows you to not only do manual testing, meaning you can have access to do exploratory testing on these browsers or devices, but you can also run and create your test automation scripts in the Perfecto cloud. So if you're coding in something like Selenium or Appium or XCUI test or Espresso, it really doesn't matter, even, Cucumber, BDD type frameworks, you can create those tests and execute them at scale in parallel on the Perfecto cloud. So again, it really is that single platform which you can go to, and it does serve a wide variety of the audience. Now, one of the things, Maurice, we see a lot is, you mentioned with XenServer, what about performance? You can really delve into certain things which will show us today. Of course, Perfecto will help you with that debug information on the client side. So how is the actual user experiencing that today? So I know we're going to look at, showing a demo over here. And I think, Maurice, one of the things we really want to talk to is really what are we going to show today, and where does all of these tools fit in?
Great. Yes. Thank you very much, Nico. So as I was alluding to earlier, the demo today that we're going to see is a Magento application. So Magento is, for those of you who don't know, is a very popular e-commerce application for PHP that you can customize, and you can add all kinds of extensions and add-ons. But at its core, it runs PHP. It's actually built with some elements of Zend framework, which diverged quite a bit since then. But there's a lot of it is at its heart a PHP application. It's a very, very popular application. There's so many stores out there that are built with Magento, and the reason for it is that it's just a really resilient and a really good open source store, and allows you to build stores, e-commerce stores, really quickly. So starting with Magento, we're going to take that deployment, and what we're going to show you is I'm going to show you on the code side. So if we were to you can see the different elements here. You can see Zend and Perfecto, and you can see where each fit here and where each helps. So we're going to show you on the demo today how both Perfecto and Zend can help you on the development stage, how Zend can help you on the deployment stage. Both Perfecto and Zend, you can get testing and feedback. On the monitoring, it should be Zend and Perfecto as well here. But the idea, and we're going to show you, what we're going to show you is really the tip of the iceberg that you can do with those two products, because we do have about 30 minutes to demo both of these to you, but there's so much, and they go so much in depth. I think we could probably do 2 series of 10 webinars each if we were to go with every specific product. I have a lot to say, and I'm pretty sure Nico has a lot to say as well on Perfecto. So without further ado, let's start at the beginning. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And what we're going to be showing while my screen share comes up, we're going to start with the deployment of the application here. We're going to, so as we can't really go into a whole full life cycle or test cycle of actually writing some code and pushing it, etc., we're going to start a deployment step, and we're going to show you the tooling that's available to you as you're using XenServer. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So we're going to go ahead, and what we're going to do, so this is XenServer. This is what you see when you log into the application server. And what we're going to start with is we have some sample application packages that we package just for kind of testing, and we're going to use one of those. So we're going to go ahead and use Magento. And that shows you how to deploy applications actually on XenServer, which is pretty awesome because it's just so easy. So you can go here, we can wait for the package to download. We've downloaded 530 megs, that was pretty fast. So we can go, we're going to choose to deploy it to magento.local, which is a vhost that I set up for this demo. We are going to do some validation. And next we should be seeing the license agreement. There we go. So I'm going to agree to that. Obviously I've read it before, haha. And we've got some here. You can see the power already of application deployment, by the way. Here you can see that we've got some extensions. So we're validating certain extensions. We've packaged our application in such a way that it validates that some of the extensions that are required are actually exist on the XenServer deployment that we're deploying. And we're validating that the PHP version should be at least 5.6, which it's pretty cool that they go that much back. But we're actually running 7.3.15 right now. So with all this prerequisites filled, we can go ahead, and you can see here that there are some variables that deployment allows you to set up when you want to deploy an application. So the package was set up to ask for a database credentials. So a database address, as well as a password, as well as a database name. So we're going to call it webinar, Magento webinar, and a default username and password that you're going to use to be able to log into your Magento store. So when all these are filled in, you can go ahead and you can deploy your application. and there is a multiple stage deployment. So this is going to take a while because it's checking all the, so it's populating a database, it's creating a test database, and it's deploying the test store with all of its assets. So this takes a while to actually deploy. So while this is happening, we can take a quick look at what we're going to see throughout the demo. So I'm going to first show you the development tools. So ZRA is a tool that was created both for development and production, but it's got a very strong use case for development where developers can see, we're talking about this left shifting earlier on when we started the webinar. So developers can see really what's going on in their application while they're actually writing the code, and they have tools at their fingertips to be able to understand what's going on. And you have tools such as, a generic dashboard where you can see all of the application, all of that, what's happening on your server right now, right? So you can see your overall system health, system utilization. You can see some monitoring data here, which we're going to go into. You can see what applications are deployed. And I think if everything went well, we're still deploying here. So while this is going on, so you've got tools around debugging, you've got some functionality around job queuing, so you can asynchronize a lot of the workloads of what's going on with XenServer and your PHP code. And we went into activating phase here, so it shouldn't be long anymore. And you can see XenServer in by itself is also extensible, where you have a set of plugins that you can enable. So I have my Magento and my Magento 2 plugins that are installed right now, but you've got a bunch of plugins that you can install. There's a plugin gallery. We have a little store here where you can extend the functionality of XenServer based on the application that you're using with XenServer. So going back to our application that should be deployed now, if we go here and we go to magento.local, which is where I deployed my my Magento store. So the first run always takes long with Magento because it's caching a bunch of stuff, but you should see the page coming up soon. And one of the things that we're going to start with, there we go. So one of the things is that we're going to start with is the ZRA. So I was talking about ZRA. Let's just wait for the page to load. It's going to happen. I don't know, it's a bit slower than usual. I don't know if it's because I'm on the webinar or what have you, but this should be a little bit faster than this. It's kind of weird. I have another tab here that's already open. That's my backup in case this one failed, but this one is still working, so we're going to do it this one. There we go. So the store is loading now, and we can probably go around the store. So one of the first things I wanted to show you is that if we paste a very special token here, which I actually copied here, I put ZRA in selective mode because I didn't want it to be enabled for everyone. If we paste this special token, one of the things that you're going to start seeing is a toolbar appearing at the bottom of the page once the page reloads right there. And this is ZRA. So this is a bar that is not available for in default PHP applications. It's only available when you're using XenServer. And what you can see in this tool set is really interesting details about the execution of your request. So you can see how much PHP, how much time you spent on PHP, how much time you spent on database back and forth. You can see if you have, the peak memory utilization. So the page consumed 124 megs to render. That's not a small number, by the way. You can see the events that were triggered by that page. So we do have an event reporting, so event monitoring in XenServer, which shows you all the events that are happening live on the server as they're happening. And you can see here one of the features that I love about this is you can see all your database requests. You can see that I generated 197 database queries in order to render that page. I'm sorry. And you can see here all the results, right? You can see also that those are generally under PHP, they're prepared statements, but you don't see them as prepared statements. You see it as the query that actually went to the database, right? And this, to illustrate my point, abstraction about the developer generally not realizing how much work goes into the background because you're using either a database abstraction layer or using a CRM, or you're using, you're not the CRM, I'm sorry, an ORM, an object relational mapper. So you're using all these tools that can make it so easy for you to develop, but there's a toll that is being taken on the back end that you're not aware of. So maybe your ORM, when you're writing a simple piece of code, is generating 100 requests or 100 queries in the background, and you're not aware of it. And that's what the amount of visibility that Z-Array tries to give you, right? You can see here all the functions that you're calling. So for instance, let's try to see if there's anything really interesting here. So we can see, for instance, that ltrim and substring are called each 24,000 and 22,000 times. Now the duration is 16 milliseconds across all executions, but you're still calling, you're still calling them quite a bit of times, and it can give you some insight into really what's going on in that execution, in your application's execution or your request execution. Finally, you can see some super globals here. So you have get, post, and you can compare between request, what changed, and you can see your session data. And last but not least, you can see some Magento-specific information. So you can see events, you can see the blocks that are rendered on a page. Magento works with these blocks, right? Rendered blocks and blocks. You can see the plugins that are loaded. You can see intercepted methods. So this is we can intercept some of the method calls, and we can change or log some data. How many objects were created? You can see all the observers, right? And you can see all the modules that are loaded in Magento with their specific version if it's available. So Z-Array is extensible. It's written in PHP, and you can extend the whole thing. Which, by the way, goes for also XenServer. XenServer is API enabled, and we use all the APIs that XenServer actually publishes. So anything that you can see me do, or that you're seeing me doing in a demo today, you can do via API. So I'm going to pause here. This is the development side of it. So obviously, Z-Array can be used in production as well, and there's use cases where when you catch something that's going on in production, you can enable Z-Array only for specific requests, and it has a very low impact on performance, so you can run it without any problem, and you can follow user sessions and do some really interesting things like that. But I'm going to take a pause here, and I'm going to pass it over to Nico, who's going to talk to you a little bit more about the testing now that I've showed you this. Nico, over to you.
Thank you, Maurice. So first of all, I just want to go over, again, what the Perfecto platform gives you. So when you open up Perfecto, obviously you get quite a few options over here. And the first thing is when we look at manual testing. So, maybe as a developer, I've done my, dev work, and I quickly want to get to maybe a specific device. And as you can see over here with Perfecto, this is just a small sample in this demo environment of all the different devices that I have available, multiple Android, iOS devices. But more so if I want to get, a cross-browser test going, I have access to real Mac machines. And again, I can pick different operating systems, different browsers, even older versions of that browser if I need to reproduce an error. One of the other great things we do offer as well is getting the latest version or the beta version of a specific browser. So really getting ready and preparing for what your customers will potentially be using in the near term. One of the other great things that we do offer with Perfecto is the ability to access a browser from different locations, for example, Australia or Germany or the US. But if I want to look at a mobile device, for example, I can go ahead and open up, for example, in this case, Apple iPad mini, and I can really look at how my application will work. And this is the same site that, Maurice, you just published. So again, you can see I can open it up on a tablet. I can, for example, open it up on a Samsung Galaxy to see how this will work, or an Apple iPhone XS, for example. Of course, I can toggle them sideways to see how they work in different views if I want to do some manual exploratory testing. Now, one of the other great things you can do, for example, if I have an online store, is that I might want to test, how does my find a location or find a pickup point work within my application. So, for example, if I wanted to say, hey, change my application location as if I'm sitting in Sydney in Australia, I could absolutely do so. And now, if I look for my closest branch, or if I want to see is the currency displaying correctly, will it actually go ahead and change my US dollar to Australian dollar, for example? So a great way to test those more advanced things as well. Of course, we do support, installing and running native applications. So if you have a native version of your app, you could do that on these different phones as well. We can also simulate things like Touch ID, Face ID, insert audio, all those common things that you typically would expect on these devices. Not only can you look at running the apps or running web apps, you can also debug what's going on within that device itself. So that typically is for what we call manual testing, where I can access these devices and reproduce a problem. Now, one of the other things we typically want to do, as Maurice pointed out, is when you start to deploy these applications, how are we folding our testing into that? So one of the things you can do with Perfecto is if you're using a continuous deployment or continuous integration, pipeline, you can integrate Perfecto directly into that, and I'll actually show you how to do that. So what I've got over here is you can see my Luma site, which is 2 tests that I've got for my smoke test. So every time Maurice pushes a deployment, this will automatically run and actually do a couple of tests for me. And you can see we had some problems over here. Things were breaking. And then all of a sudden we had those item 6, so the build is now returning green again. So again, this is a great way to start to get that visibility into how my testing is going. But how did we actually set that up? So let's delve into one of the great features we've got within Perfecto, which is our codeless solution. So if you want to very quickly create a test where you don't have maybe a Selenium or Appian scripter, so test automation engineer, we do allow you to record and play back these scripts using our codeless technology. So in this case, I've created a script that will actually test the whole navigation of our site. So as Maurice deploys it, let's make sure that people can actually navigate the whole site, get to all the pages that we know are key, and that they can actually execute, for example, a shopping cart and check that out. So you can actually create these scripts quite easily. But one of the things we know that's a headache for testers is maintenance. So as Maurice and the team might be updating and making changes to this app as they deploy them, they might rename buttons, right, or change the CSS class. And typically for our Selenium or Appian developers, if you go by XPath or class ID or those sorts of things, this is where a lot of maintenance is spent. So our codeless solution will actually automatically go and figure out, is this button still the same button, by using some machine learning in the background where it understands what makes this button unique, what makes it the add to cart button or the checkout button or whatever the button might be that you want to click on, or link, or whatever the case is. So it's a great way to reduce maintenance on these scripts by roughly 90%. So really something phenomenal from an AI and machine learning capability. But once we've created these tests, what do we actually do with them? Now, of course, the first thing I want to do is I want to take that single test and I want to make sure that I run it against the most popular browsers, as I said. So in this case, I'm going to run it against 4 different browsers, from Internet Explorer to Chrome to Firefox to Edge. So I want to make sure that I cover all of these. And then what I want to do is I want to make that run automatically. So, of course, I can integrate this within my CI/CD pipeline. So if I use something like Jenkins or TeamCity or GitLab or GitHub, Azure DevOps, so any of these types of CI/CD tools, even Bitrise, are available for you to use. So if yours is not on the list, you can, of course, use the command line option to do so. But if you don't have that available and you want to start to add your testing into this, every couple of hours run my test, the Perfecto system allows you to schedule it as well. So here I've got my job, the Luma site smoke test, and I'm going to manually kick that off. So I'm going to simply hit the run button and say, hey, let's go ahead and run this on multiple platforms at the same time. And actually what's going to happen right now within the Perfecto platform is it will go ahead and spin up multiple phones, multiple browsers for me, and run tests on the site in real time. And we'll give it a couple of seconds as these browsers will start to spin up. And you can start to see the first browser, and a couple more will now start to spin up. And it'll start to go through the process of testing, for example, the navigation, as I've mentioned, the copyright, the cart, checkout, all these things will now start to test. And you can absolutely see the power of this, Maurice. With a click of a button, I can very quickly start to test how will my real user experience be, for the site within a production environment, be it on phones or browsers. So really tremendously powerful.
Yeah, it's pretty awesome. I mean, just the live screens going and the multiple devices loading, and that's like a developer's dream right there. Just being able to see, especially on the front end side, being able to see how your site renders on all these devices just so simply.
Absolutely. And from a developer side, as you mentioned, hey, I want to quickly get an older version of IE. Where would I get that, right? So Perfecto allows you to very quickly do that and get that data, right? So it makes all of that hassle very, very easy. Now, you might be saying to yourself, well, what if I don't have a production side? What if I need to test something that's internal? So I have an internal XenServer that might be serving my internal team, and I want to debug or test against, local host. You can absolutely do that with Perfecto. So we allow you to debug against a local instance as well. So you have this concept of what we call a P-connect, where I can create a connection between my local machine and the Perfecto cloud, and thereby very quickly and easily debug against these applications in real time, different browsers, different phones, whatever the use case might be. More importantly, from a testing perspective, and if you're a QA manager or really looking at the teams, what's going on with testing? Where are the problems happening? So I can actually take a longer view of, for example, what we call a heat map. So which browsers are giving me a problem right now, right? So I can see for the most part, I'm having problems with Firefox, right? So that's where the biggest problems lie today. I don't have really too many problems on IE or Edge or Chrome at this point. So I can really log in and delve into, specific tests and make sure they run. So I can have the latest report. I can filter them by a certain timestamp. So all of these things I can certainly do. Now, if I want to get into these tests, I certainly have a lot more detail that I can delve into. So, for example, I can see this test as it ran against 4 different, browsers at the same time. So every time I did a click or I did a step, I can see a screenshot to every single one at that time. Now, as a developer, I can actually go into that specific test and see all the steps that it executed. I can see how things looked at every step. In fact, I also have a video that I can play back to actually look to see how this test performed at that time. So then you can see it's opening up, and I can actually speed this up to make it run a bit faster, right? So I can see how it worked on this browser, which is the Internet Explorer. Now, if I'm using something like Jira and I want to quickly create a bug in Jira, I can instantly select that button and say new IE bug for Magento, right? So I can instantly log that, and now the link between Jira and Perfecto has been created. So as an engineer, you don't have to guess how to reproduce a problem. You just open up your Jira ticket and click on the report, and you can come and see a video of it. Now, of course, we give you information about the test. So, what was the device that you were using or browser that you were using, right? So you can really help reproduce that easier. Furthermore, what about things like HAR files for performance debugging on the client side? We give you access to that as well. You not only get the networks, the vitals. If it was a real device, you'll get device logs. We can also do accessibility testing, right? So if you want to run, your open source accessibility testing tools or the built-in Android, iOS accessibility scanners against your app, you can absolutely do so. So we can even help you understand if your app is complying to those rules as well. So again, all of this combined, Maurice, makes a really attractive package, right, to help people understand how to very quickly reproduce a problem and then solve it, and fundamentally helping reduce some of those bugs getting into production. So we know this is, absolutely key for engineers.
Absolutely. This is great. I mean, it's, again, just the power that you have with just being able to so quickly switch between different environments and being able to run different, and even recording them is just so easy, and so you get all that stuff just out of the box. It's really great. So let me go ahead and share my screen once again and show you a little bit what was going on XenServer while Nico was running all these tests on Perfecto, because you've been pounding the server pretty hard. So we should see some interesting data
One
here.
of the things Maurice, you mentioned earlier was, one of the things I found interesting is, how do I know what my customers are using, right? And I saw, in Zend, you could actually see what mobile devices or browsers they're coming from. And again, you could use that information, right, to very quickly, in Perfecto, pick the things that your customers are actually using, right? So really, again, think of delighting our customers. How do we do that? So, that's just immensely powerful, right? Take that analysis and use it to really test as your customers are using the system.
Absolutely, and this is exactly what Nico was talking about. So you can see the, we have breakdowns of mobile usage and mobile statistics here, just to show you that again. So you can see this is data that is very specific to only mobile, right? So you can see which devices the data came from and the request came from, and you can see where your mobile versus desktop kind of processing. So you can see it's pretty cool because you can see live what Nico was doing and requests that he was sending to the server, and you can see kind of the breakdown between the two. So let's go back a little bit also to here. You can see here during the past couple of hours. So when we started on this webinar, obviously we started generating some traffic. Me when I was demoing the app, and Nico when he was actually sending the test to the server. So you can see that you can kind of go through that, and you can see my events breakdown. So we generated some events, obviously, because our system is tuned to with a very low threshold right now, so that we're able to collect some data and show you. So we've got a lot of high memory usage functions, requests, where we're just consuming a lot of memory. And if we take one of them and we go, just as an example, we can expand that one, and we can drill down a little bit further. We can see all of the environment that you would need in order to replicate that problem. So Perfecto records its own set of data, right, Nico, on its side. It records all the parameters that it sent through a request. We also capture that on the XenServer side. We get all the environment and the context in which the application was executed, but we get it from the PHP perspective. So we're very close to the engine, which means that we can get data that's very, very actionable in conjunction with what you get from Perfecto, right? And then we record also, obviously, the request variable. So if you had any get parameters, post parameter, if you had any session data, we could also collect that information. And the idea behind giving you all of this data is that, in a typical production use case, let's say that you have a user that hit the blank page. Most of the time, in 90% of the cases, they're not going to report it. They're just going to continue with their business. They're going to either try to find another site that can deliver what they want, or they're going to keep trying. They're going to eventually get frustrated, and they're going to abandon, or, by some fluke, the website, your store is going to work all of a sudden, right? But you don't have that information unless you have monitoring tools that actually records that and gives you that information as it happens live, right? And in order for you as a developer, you're not going to probably have a reproduction scenario in order to reproduce the problem. But with XenServer, you can get a lot of the information that you need in order to shorten your troubleshooting. And that's the key here. In most cases, fixing a bug, it's not writing the code that takes time to fix a bug in most cases, right? In most cases, it's really the troubleshooting and trying to repeat the scenario that made the bug or made the crash happen in the first place. And if you can reduce or eliminate that process from being a manual process to completely automating it and collect enough information that you can actually get the insights you need in order to fix that bug right there and then, that's a win, because you've reduced the amount of time overall, right, Nico? You reduce the amount of time that your company is spending on bug fixing and bug hunting, which is huge. So,
absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's key, right, Maurice? That is really, I think if that's one thing people take away today is how do I get the tools to really take out some of those manual workflows and really get things going in a more of a easier way to reproduce, find things, and fix them quickly.
Exactly. And if you don't have enough information in this data about a request, we go even further, right? We give you what we call a code trace. And that's really, you're going to love this one, Nico. So this one is really cool because it tells you function by function what your application did, right? And you can go and you can drill down into the details of the execution. You can see the function, you can see the return value, you can see the return parameters, you can see the arguments that you pass to a function, right? You can see what the return values are. And you can see just by clicking here, it becomes kind of a game, a really fun one if you ask me. But you can drill down function by function, just follow the blue bar, follow the rabbit, right? Follow the blue bar and see where your function is spending the most time, or where your program, your execution is spending the most time. And just, by going there, eventually I will get to a point where, it's smaller and smaller. And then I have to look at really this unit separately and this unit separately. And I have to optimize, and I have, and there are ways to do that, right? There are so many ways to optimize execution flows. As a matter of fact, we offer a few with job queue and caching in order to be able to streamline the processing of your web pages and make them go faster. But from there on, the point is that you have all the diagnostics, you have everything that you need. It's like I often say when I explain what code tracing does and what Z-Rays does, I often say they're a black box recorder, because they're there and they're watching over the execution of your application when you're not necessarily there, and you can be on every single request. So it's recording, it's in the back doing its thing, just recording data and making sure that it's available to you when you need it. So Let's switch gears a little bit. We talked a lot about the monitoring features. I just want to touch on a couple of points that also are relevant from, on the Perfecto side. So obviously we take security very, very seriously, right? We deal with a lot of companies in the healthcare space and the insurance space that are very heavily regulated. So in what we have in XenServer, in order to, one of the features that we have is masking. So other than the fact that we support PHP and we support long-term versions, we offer long-term support for PHP. So we support PHP past the time that the community supports it at Zend, and we offer that support to our customers. But we also, in XenServer itself, we have a feature called data masking, and all the monitoring data that I showed you, imagine, you can see the return values, you can see the arguments. Imagine if you're passing patient-sensitive information or credit card information. Well, data masking allows you to mask a number of things. So you can say, for these functions, do not record the arguments or do not record the return values. Or if you have identifiers that you hit in the global variables or in SQL queries, if you hit any of these, what we'll do is just scrub that data and we'll mask it. We'll show you little stars instead of the actual data. You can even go by function data parameters, so you can define regular expressions. This one is for a social insurance number or social security number in the US, and we can mask that data. So you have a number of options to trap data and to make sure that no sensitive data gets ever shown to your customers. We also have audit trailing in XenServer as part of the XenServer feature set, which shows you exactly what you did from the time that you logged on to XenServer or any interaction with XenServer, right? And you can see here at the beginning of the demo, I actually deployed XenServer, and then I logged into the admin as an admin to the XenServer interface. So all these features, there's a lot more, but all of these are features that make or ensure that your development is secure, or that you're running your applications in production is secure. Nico, I think data masking is something that you have in Perfecto as well, correct?
Absolutely. If you look at our customer base, as you mentioned, it's a Fortune 500, right? So these could be big teams, smaller teams. It really doesn't matter, right? And these teams are located globally. So not only do we need to make sure that sensitive data is masked, as you mentioned. So, good news is Zend can mask it. When that's running your test automation, the same will happen in Perfecto. More importantly, GDPR also comes in for a lot of our European-based customers. So again, making sure that you comply to those things, not only accessibility, but how do I mask data? Is there audit trail? So all those things certainly are available as part of Perfecto. And I think that creates a nice synergy between the fact that, what I'm using in engineering or dev, whatever translates with my QA team and then testing on production, it is nice and secure, and I really don't have to worry about, exposing any of that data.
Absolutely. So we take security very seriously at Perforce.
Perfect. I
think that's all I had to show you today. Is there anything you want to say in closing, Nico?
I think that just shows you the power of the two tools working together. So thank you so much for that, Maurice. I think, Megan, do we have any questions from the audience today?
Thank you very much, Maurice and Nico. We do have a few minutes left for questions. Our first question from the audience is asking, let's see, Nico, this one's for you. Can I use Perfecto to test both browser and mobile device browsers at the same time?
Absolutely. That's a great question, right? We know that, most people today use either phone or tablet to search for something, buy something, or do some sort of shopping online or use a digital service, be it, picking up an order, curbside, or whatever it might be. So Perfecto allows you not only to test the browser on, a desktop browser like a Mac or Windows operating system, but also a browser on a phone or the native app version. For those of you doing progressive web apps, so that's a web app, that can be act like a native app on a phone. We also support testing those. And again, there's many testing frameworks out there, but Perfecto allows you, if some teams are using some technologies and others are using maybe something else, you can have a single testing tool like Perfecto to help you test all of those. So absolutely, that's possible.
Great. Thanks, Nico. Here's another one for you. How many tests can I run in parallel?
In parallel, really as many as you want. So the Perfecto platform was designed to be elastic, right? So you can scale to thousands of tests. So really, it's all about what you're licensed for, right? So if you're licensed for 1,000 executions in parallel, you can run 1,000. We also offer bursting. So let's say, for example, you get into a testing cycle where you say, hey, we've got 100 licenses, but I need to quickly scale up to 1,000. You can actually do that with our bursting capabilities. So, really the sky's the limit. But the system itself was designed to scale up to thousands of executions. To give you a sense of what we did in 2019, we did almost probably 10 million executions, right? So the platform itself can scale to your needs. So certainly no worries about how many you can run at the same time.
Great. Thank you, Nico. Our next question is for Maurice. How is XenServer different from community PHP?
Well, good question. So this goes back to the slide. Let me go back and put this slide. Actually, it's going to be pretty easy to explain here. So in community PHP, you basically get the engine which is required, the runtime that is required to run applications, and that's it. You don't get anything else really, unless you install other modules and open source components. XenServer gives you everything that you need in order to be able to diagnose, in order to monitor, in order to improve performance, in order to give you some security features around your PHP applications. And we do that by extending the core of PHP. Right, and that's really where the difference is. It's the value. So on the support side, we also support, like I mentioned, PHP for long-term. We offer long-term support for PHP versions. So we support them after the community drops support for them, because in a lot of cases in larger enterprises, it's not as easy to migrate. In a lot of companies too, it's not as easy to migrate to newer versions of PHP. So we keep offering that support for a longer time frame. But we also offer a lot of value on the monitoring side, as well as security, et cetera, which I showed you today, the webinar.
Great, thanks, Maurice. All right, the next question is for Nico. Can you generate HAR files during the test?
Absolutely. So a HAR file is really the browser side performance metrics that you typically see. So how long did certain files take to load? Which files could be my bottleneck? For those web developers, can I defer certain loading events to be asynchronous, or do sort of lazy loading of my CSS or some non-essential files? So HAR files are pretty important, specifically as you start to get more load on your website and you want, the page to show up sooner, be interactive sooner, all those sorts of things. So the Perfecto platform has a special flag. You can say, hey, give me those HAR files, and then it's actually something you can download, put into a HAR reader, and you can actually go and see where the bottlenecks are. And again, that's just super useful on the front-end side for what your customers would experience. How can you make that experience, better for them in the future?
Great. Thanks, Nico. All right, Maurice, a question for you. Do I need to change my application's code to run with XenServer?
Actually, no, and that's the beauty. One of the beauties of XenServer and of using XenServer, you don't have to change anything. I mean, XenServer adapts to your application, and with specifically Z-Ray, you can instrument your application from the outside in. So basically, you can write code that will capture and intercept some of the function calls without the need for instrumenting your code from your code itself, right? So you can do everything from the outside. We also have some APIs for some of our components that allow you to go a little bit deeper if you want and capture more specific and more granular information, but you don't have to modify the application's code, absolutely not.
Thank you. Here's another question for you, Maurice. Is there a performance impact to running monitoring on XenServer?
Well, that's a bit of a loaded question. I mean, there always is a performance impact when you're running monitoring tools, right? I'd be lying, and you probably wouldn't believe me if I sat here and told you there's absolutely no performance impact. But in most cases, it's minimal and it can be managed, right? So the key here is really to tune your monitoring and to tune what you're getting in monitoring events to really be the ones that matter. So you need to tune your thresholds, and you need to make sure that you're not generating 100 or 200 events a second, because in any case, if you're generating that much events, they're probably noise. I mean, you're not going to go through all of them, and it's not the relevant data unless the server really gets impacted. But even if it does, we do have safeguards into in operation, where we watch for the amount of memory that's being used and we watch for the load average. And if it spikes or if it goes too high, we disable, we shut down monitoring. So to answer, to summarize, tune. And if you tune properly, you tune your threshold, you shouldn't be seeing, you should be seeing events that are really something that happened wrong. And if you do, the performance impact is very minimal. It's hard to really tell because it varies from application to application, but it's really, it's really minimal. Three, make sure that just everything is tuned properly, and that your the safeguard and the shutdown will enter and it will kick in if your server load goes too high.
Great. That's all we have time for today. If we didn't get to your question, we'll reach out to you via email. Thank you to our audience for your attendance and your participation today, Maurice and Nico.
Thank you.
Thank you.